Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Web3 Quick Bites podcast, the podcast where we jump to the latest beats in the decentralized world and chat with some of the brilliant minds in the Web3 industry. I'm your host, Olabisi, and today we are diving deep into the world of Web3 startups and investments with a true industry insider. Our guest is Alexandra, a powerhouse in the Web3 investment scene. Alexandra is not just talking the talk. She's walking the work as the investment manager at Cointelegraph Accelerator. She has worked with startups from all over the globe, helping them secure funding, scale up, and even nail those coveted exits. From DeFi to blockchain infrastructure, Alexandra's got a finger on the pulse of what's hot in Web3. She's also the brains behind some dope accelerator programs, connecting the dots between innovation and cold hard cash. So guys, whether you're curious about Web3 or you're already knee-deep in crypto, you're going to want to hear what Alexandra has to say. She's got the inside scoop on what's happening in Web3 startups right now. We're about to get some serious insights on what it takes to make it in the wild world of Web3 startups. Let's welcome Alexandra to the show. Hi Alexandra, it's so good to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, how are things going over in the startup world today?
Oh, very exciting. I think we can dive into everything that's happening over the course of this chat.
All right, I can't wait. So I think my first question is, which I always ask my guests, my default question is, how do you get started in the Web3 space? It's an interesting question for me as a host because I get diverse answers. People found themselves in the Web3 space by chance. A friend mentioned it, or they were at a conference and they heard it, and then they went down the rabbit hole of the Web3 world. So how about you?
Yeah, I think I was close to the startup and innovation world from the get-go. Back in 2015, I started working in a digital media startup in Dubai. We created content about the innovation industry in the MENA region, and we interviewed thought leaders in large tech companies like IBM, as well as local tech giants. And we interviewed startups that were disrupting the market and building products and services based on emerging technologies like blockchain and AI. What I saw then was a gap between startups and large tech corporations that could be bridged by bringing them together and creating a collaborative environment. Large tech companies were slow to innovate because of cumbersome internal structures. I think this is familiar to anyone working in large tech corporations. And startups lacked the resources to execute and go to market. So I developed an incubator that focused on partnerships between the two. Startups could do pilot projects and offer their solutions to corporations, and corporations provided them with resources that they lacked, such as marketing, accounting, legal services, a company registration in some cases. It was a win-win for both. And blockchain technology was the new craze at the time, and its potential applications really sparked my interest. So one of the incubator participants was a blockchain startup that I ended up joining after the incubation program. And we developed blockchain solutions for government departments. This was my gateway to Web3.
Right, interesting. This has always been an interesting question for me. I'm always excited to ask my guests this question. We all pride ourselves in the Web3 space, one way or the other, and yours is quite an interesting journey. So that question was for me, out of my curiosity. So let's get to the question for today, the first question for today. So your journey from interviewing thought leaders in the Middle East to becoming an investment manager at Cointelegraph Accelerator is fascinating. So could you walk us through how your early experience in the nascent Middle Eastern startup ecosystem shaped your perspective on emerging technologies and eventually led you to the world of Web3?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of mapped out my early career path, starting out from a startup incubator in the Middle East. And Dubai in particular is kind of renowned for having very obvious hype cycles. I don't know if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycles. In Dubai, it's extremely evident where each year a new technological vertical is trending very strongly. So at the time when I was starting to work with startups and developing an incubator, blockchain and Web3 was a very hype sphere, and everyone was thinking of how to implement this technology. how to work with blockchain startups. And it was because I was already working with startups, it was very easy for me to enter this space. And eventually ending up at Cointelegraph Accelerator was kind of the intersection of my previous experience in running acceleration programs, as well as experience in the blockchain and Web3 space.
So, which brings me to my second question. As someone who has witnessed the growth of both traditional and Web3 startups, what differences have you observed in how Web3 startups approach building and scaling their projects? I mean, there's going to be a difference between both traditional and Web3 startups. So, what have you observed in how these Web3 startups approach building and scaling their projects? Yeah. Are there any lessons from the traditional startup world that you find particularly valuable in the Web3 space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main difference between the two are in the approaches to marketing and community growth. Web3 startups often have an opportunity to launch their own native tokens or NFTs that they can then leverage to engage their potential end users through airdrops or reward mechanisms or onboard KOLs through dedicated investment rounds. And this creates a lot of opportunity for Web3 startups around promoting different milestones, be it testing a new product feature, a full-scale platform launch, or the listing of their token on exchanges or launchpads. And these token incentives are a double-edged sword, though, from what I've seen. They're certainly very effective when used correctly and not abused by startup founders. It can be very tempting to generate buzz for your startup through token reward mechanisms, but it can also create a lot of reputational risk in cases where the startup does not deliver on their expected milestones. Whereas traditional startups have a more sustainable growth trajectory, there are less opportunities to create explosive traction through marketing. They have to rely on their actual execution and product delivery. And this is something that Web3 projects can really benefit from, is being product focused.
Right. Awesome. So I guess there's always a lesson to learn from traditional Web3.
Yeah, I think they really have the fundamentals down. That's often lacking in Web3 startups.
Yeah, I think that is true because Web3 doesn't have a playbook yet.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, so how long do you think it's going to take for Web3 itself to have a playbook that startups can follow as Web2 currently has?
I think it really depends on founders' experience as well as on the type of Web3 product that we're talking about, because there are many different verticals within Web3, right? So I think DeFi in particular is a space that is maturing quite a lot. And we're seeing products emerge in the DeFi space that are really focused on real-world adoption and sustainable growth, because that's how you really scale in the long run. So I have high hopes for this approach spreading to other verticals of Web3 in the next years.
So let's talk about your experience with Cointelegraph Accelerator. So your experience working with them, what common issues have you seen in Web3 startups that didn't make it to the accelerator, and how are these problems unique to the industry?
Sure. So at Cointelegraph Accelerator specifically, we were investing in more mature startups with a working product, a solid team behind them, and we were investing in the long term. So this was important to us. So we had the key criteria that we were looking at to select the projects for the acceleration program. The projects that typically wouldn't make it, and I've seen a lot of these, were projects whose sole purpose was to launch a token and quote unquote get rich quick. And this is obvious in the early stages of project review. They would typically have a marketing campaign centered around the token launch. Their business roadmap would basically end on the TGE, which is their token generation event. So they clearly have no plans for their project post-TGE, no real value proposition for their end users, and no details about product development or traction. And because we were making long-term investments, the key criteria for us was, like I said, a working product, value proposition for the end user. And if there was a token in place, we really paid attention to the project having clear tokenomics with sustainable supply and demand.
Very good. I think we've seen a couple of Web3 startups that they look promising from the start, and then all of a sudden we don't hear anything about them. They just go poof. And then we've seen quite a lot of that in the Web3 space, which makes people who are even thinking of coming to this space think Web3 is not sustainable. I'm just tired of hearing narratives like that Web3 is not sustainable. I mean, they say there's a lot of money in the Web3 space, but the projects people are building, the people just want to come on board, get investors' money, and disappear into thin air.
Yeah, I would say for sure. I would agree with that. And I think that unfortunately, the majority of startups that we're seeing in Web3 are what you've described. What was interesting during the bear market, though, throughout 2023, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for these shallow Web3 projects to capitalize on their end users. NVCs weren't pouring a ton of money into Web3. So that really helped us to weed out these types of projects. And what remained were founders who were truly building something sustainable and creating a value for so that was interesting because it really allowed those sustainable projects to rise and succeed.
Interesting. So my follow-up question to that, can you share examples of key decisions you've seen across different Web3 startups that contributed to their success, the ones that were able to stand the test of time?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we have pretty volatile market cycles, right? And I think it really depends on the type of founder, on their experience. I think the main thing I would always advise startups to focus on is finding product market fit and being open to pivoting or refining your offering to the market. Accelerators are actually great for that. They can get you in front of many different ecosystem players through introductions or pitch sessions, and you can get honest feedback on what works and what doesn't. I've seen some founders really get stuck on their original vision of the product and stagnate for almost a year with no traction whatsoever. And others who were more flexible had launched successful products. So product market fit is one. I would also advise to focus on generating revenue, or at least to work towards that if your product allows for that at an early stage. Because number one, that's the ultimate test for your product market fit, right? And two, it would help you to attract investors because we love seeing a revenue generating project. And it would also help you to bootstrap your startup for longer if the market conditions are really unfavorable and you can't rely on fundraising. So I think we've recently seen a lot of Web3 startups also rebrand into AI projects. And although I'm always skeptical about such pivots, I think it can really work well in some cases if your business model allows for that. I specifically saw it work really well for projects in NFT analytics and SocialFi, because they're already successfully using the underlying AI tech in their products. And it's just a matter of emphasizing it and bringing it to the foreground.
Speaking of AI, you mentioned AI now, and that really caught my attention. We see of AI projects come up. Have you also been seeing that recently? Startups
Absolutely.
They come up with an idea that they wanted to do something in the DeFi space, and then they pivot to the AI industry. Why do you think that is happening? Is it because AI is the trending thing now, or people are just latching onto it and then it's going to die off soon? Or why do you think people are just building things in the AI space now, AI related stuff?
Yeah, I know. It's definitely a hype thing at the moment. I mean, at the level that it's being presented right now, and the level of investment that is being poured into AI projects. However, AI-based startups and products have been around for more than 10 years, and they're not going anywhere. They're only going to continue growing and refining their solutions in the future. So it is a solid technology that is widely used and can be used across different use cases and implementation. I think it's just right now with the launch of ChatGPT models, it's become very widespread. The barrier to entry is a lot lower. So we see a lot more projects in the space, and a lot of investors who see the promise of this technology are investing heavily in the space as well.
I mean, yeah, in all honesty, I mean, I did use a couple of generative AI tools like Copy AI and whatnot. But after ChatGPT came onto the scene, like AI just blew up. Everybody started coming up with different AI tools. AI was being integrated in literally everything. Out of 85% of the apps I have on my phone, they've all integrated AI. And it wasn't like that 2 or 3 years ago. But ChatGPT came on the scene and everybody just
It's interesting because I also come across a lot of startups who claim to be using their proprietary AI model. But when you look under the hood, most of them are using some branch of ChatGPT models. So that's extremely common and easy to replicate. That's why we see so many different projects apply to their solutions.
Oh, wow. We can only wait and see how this evolve in the next few years.
Yeah, I think the hype will die down a little bit after a couple of years, but the technology is not going anywhere. We will continue to see more and more AI solutions and applications across the board. It's just not going to be marketed so heavily as it is right now with the explosion that ChatGPT brought about.
Talk about your background. Your background includes launching an accelerator to connect startups with corporations, right? So how does growing a more mature Web3 startup, I'm talking between seed and Series A, differ from growing a traditional tech startup at a similar stage?
Yeah, well, I think marketing, community growth mechanisms can be different between the two because of the token element. But in terms of launching your startup and partnering with corporations, it can differ between Web2 and Web3 quite widely. I think if we look at traditional corporate accelerators outside of Web3, they have worked really well, in my opinion, especially for early stage projects or solo founders whose goal is to fast track the application of their technology and potentially sell it to the corporate partner. In Web3, the main challenge is a lack of use cases within corporate environments. So most traditional corporations can only provide a limited sandbox that doesn't permit Web3 technology to flourish and to offer the value of decentralization. There are limited use cases in corporations and government organizations in the UAE, for example, for private permission blockchain solutions within the perimeter of those institutions. And it's great that they're testing various applications of blockchain technology, but it's far from an effective application in comparison to what Web3 can offer. And I think the bridging of this gap really happens when traditional corporations start using Web3 solutions as tools to enhance their offerings. We can see this with metaverses, where traditional brands and fashion houses are coming to Web3 platforms and creating joint collaborations in the Web3 environment, or where businesses with physical goods start tokenizing their assets using blockchain technology.
How long do you think it's going to take for Web3 startups to get to that stage where you can evaluate a traditional startup and you can evaluate a Web3 startup and see that they are at the same level, funding-wise and group-wise and whatnot?
I think we are already there. The proportions are just different. There are fewer Web3 startups that reach maturity compared to Web2 startups. And that's simply because there's a lot more opportunity for Web3 startups to quote unquote shell their project, right? And just try to fundraise without necessarily delivering, or launch their token and then forget about their project. So a lot of those types of projects are kind of filtered out at early stages, and we're left with fewer sustainable and mature Web3 startups. But there are a lot of them, and I think we're close to the same ratio of Web2 and Web3 startups in terms of maturity.
Okay, so I have another question. Do you think traditional startups get more funding than Web3 startups do?
I don't think so. I think, well, it depends on how you look at it. There may be more Web2 startups that are receiving funding, but the valuations in Web3 are sky high. I mean, they're incomparable to the startups in Web2 field. And also because it's a trending technology, similar to AI, maybe not at the same level currently, but also in that domain. The valuations are a lot higher, and the focus on investing in this field is a lot higher. So I don't think that Web3 startups are receiving less funding than Web2 traditional companies.
Interesting. I mean, that question just came top of my head because you were talking about the whole comparison with the traditional startups or Web3 startups. Curious to know who was getting more funding, who was getting more money. It's right.
Yeah, I think it depends on geographies, and there are different funds that have like a specific focus. So there are still a lot of funds remaining that are heavily investing in Web2 only. And then there are dedicated funds that invest in digital assets or Web3 startups, and that's a completely separate focus. Most often, these venture firms and the investment focus does not intersect. So they're quite segregated, but there's a heavy amount of investing going into Web3 for sure.
Thank you. When I have clarity on that, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are also these blockchain foundations that are incentivizing Web3 projects to build their solutions on their specific protocols, right? And they offer a lot of investments, grants. They create their own labs and acceleration programs to incentivize the projects to build on their in their ecosystem and potentially onboard new users through these new solutions. This is done by Near Protocol, Algorand Foundation, Cosmoverse. I mean, pretty much any large blockchain protocol would have a foundation that invests in grant to Web3 startups.
Oh, true. One thing I always say is I can't wait to see what the future holds and how things are going to evolve in the next, let's say, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You can wait. And I know by then we'll be having different conversations on this stuff. So as a former World Economic Forum global shaper, you've been part of a network driving change at a local level. What's your perspective on the impact of Web3 technologies on global communities versus local ones? And how do regulatory challenges factor into this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've also seen a few startups apply to Web3 acceleration programs that I ran that were focused on creating impact locally. I personally see a lot of limitations in that approach. First of all, because of regulatory hurdles, definitely. I believe that Web3 has a lot more impact in connecting and empowering global communities rather than being confined to local ones. Because one of the strengths of Web3 is its ability to transcend borders, right? By creating decentralized networks that are not limited by geography. And this is especially powerful in sectors like finance, from what we've seen. When it comes to local communities, there are often significant regulatory hurdles that can slow down or even halt the adoption of Web3 technologies. In certain markets, local jurisdictions have different approaches to regulation, which can create a lot of complexities for Web3 startups that are trying to navigate compliance, and that limits their ability to scale and implement their solutions effectively within multiple localities. But that being said, there are a few areas where Web3 can have tangible local impact, though it's often in the form of global platforms with local applications. So, for example, like I mentioned, many DeFi platforms are providing communities in developing regions with access to financial services that were previously unavailable through traditional financial systems. Another example are blockchain-based supply chains that can provide transparency on the goods, the origin and transportation of goods, or Web3 platforms that support local creators like artists, musicians, or influencers by giving them direct access to a global audience without any intermediaries. So ultimately, I think the most exciting aspect of Web3 is its potential to kind of level the playing field globally, enabling small businesses, creators, and entrepreneurs to access opportunities beyond their local economies. And it really breaks down these barriers and allows people to engage in markets or communities where they would otherwise never have had access to.
Yeah. That last sentence is exactly why I love being in this space. You have access to you normally would not even give you attention. But in Web3, everybody we're all in the same, we're all together. So there's no barrier. You could be talking to a C-level executive at a company and you wouldn't know, because I believe everybody sees themselves in this Web3 space as beginners, as we're all learners, we're all newbies.
Yeah.
You have access to people, you have access to community.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also love being in the space for this reason.
Yeah, and people are always willing. They are willing to share their knowledge, their time with you. And that has also helped me greatly in this space too. I reach out because when I was starting out in the Web3 space too, I was confused. I had no guidance, but then I reached out to a couple of people, and the way they were willing to share their knowledge with me, the way they were willing to explain how things works in this space was like, okay, I think I finally found a place I can call home. I'm never leaving. Never that with me. It's really,
yeah. I really think Web3 communities are probably the most supportive communities I've ever encountered, especially in the tech space, which is really amazing.
Yeah, well, and yeah, in Lagos, Nigeria, where I'm based, we see a couple of young people that are growing really, really fast, and it's because of these communities. because people are willing, people are not holding back on their knowledge, people are not holding back. They're always willing to share what they've learned
Mm-hmm.
with other people. And then that's why we have a fast-growing community in Nigeria. And it's quite surprising because people are just learning new things, coming up with new ideas. Communities are sharing what they've learned with other people, and it's just really exciting to see. And I'm also seeing that on a global level too. Communities outside Nigeria too, how people are also willing to share their ideas, their thoughts with each other. It's really exciting.
I love that.
It's great. Yeah. Really
It seems to be like a way to elevate and uplift everyone around you, right? So that's the great thing about this. No one really feels left behind. It's extremely supportive. Everyone is learning together. The space is constantly evolving. Everyone is sharing different tips and trends that are happening and new opportunities that are coming up both locally and globally. And I think now we're kind of entering this conference season where a lot of people are traveling to other countries to attend large Web3 conferences. And it's a cool opportunity to interact with a lot of these global communities in person and then maintain these connections throughout the year until the next time you see each other, and follow up and find ways to collaborate. And I think it's what makes this industry so thriving and so productive in comparison to a lot of others, I think.
So I really agree with that. So that brings me to my next question about how the Web3 landscape is constantly evolving. So based on your observations and interactions with startups, what emerging trends or technologies within the Web3 ecosystem do you believe will have the most significant impact in the next few years? But most importantly, how are you seeing startups position themselves to capitalize on these trends?
Yeah, I think it's evident now that layer 2 scaling solutions are going to be critical in the coming years. As more applications and users come into the Web3 space, the issue of scalability continues to be a bottleneck, and L2 solutions can reduce the cost and time of transactions while maintaining the security of layer 1 blockchains like Ethereum. And these solutions are definitely going to gain traction. And I think startups that are optimizing these solutions are positioning themselves for success by solving one of Web3's most pressing challenges, right, which is scalability. Another sector that I'm always looking at is DeFi. I think we're now seeing the rise of institutional DeFi, where established financial institutions are experimenting with blockchain technology. At the same time, startups in the space are positioning themselves by focusing on regulatory compliance and creating solutions that cater to both the decentralized and the traditional financial ecosystems. And GameFi is another sector I like to watch. I think now much of the initial excitement around play-to-earn gaming has leveled off, and startups are now focusing on long-term sustainable models that integrate blockchain into gaming experiences in more meaningful ways. This includes things like interoperable assets, where players can own digital assets that exist across multiple platforms, and creator-driven ecosystems, where game developers and players can monetize their creations. So I think GameFi startups can really position themselves well by building partnerships with game studios and leveraging NFTs in a way that enhances gameplay rather than just being speculative. And I guess the overall trend that I'm looking forward to is the shift towards real-world utility, like I mentioned before. I think we're moving past the speculative phase of crypto and NFTs, and startups are now focusing on how to apply blockchain technology in more practical, real-world scenarios. And projects that can focus on adoption, user experience, and regulatory alignment will be the ones to make the most impact, I think. So I'm excited to see how these trends evolve and which startups will capitalize on these opportunities.
Well, I'm excited to see them too, because I was also going to add that it's great to see that projects in the Web3 space are now moving towards more sustainable and long-term use cases. Or like when people used to associate Web3 with, what you have to do is just come up with something, launch your token, pump and dump, and then disappear, and then rebrand again and come up after a couple of few months again. So it's good to see that we have people pivoting towards more sustainable use cases and building projects that are changing the whole narratives of what people associate Web3 project with. And I mean, we're waiting for the next few years and see how this is going to last for.
For sure. No, I think we're definitely past the whole speculative phase in general because the space is maturing. But overall, it's just an inevitable part of the bull cycle. So during the next bull run, we will see projects that are, just trying to pump and dump or market themselves without building anything under the hood. That's just unfortunately an inevitable part of the market state, where a lot of players will try to capitalize on the hype and try to make a quick buck. But overall, I think the Web3 space is maturing. The end users and the audience is maturing, and people are much more skeptical towards these types of projects. And there's a real demand for sustainable solutions now. So I think that's a good opportunity for Web3 projects to build something sustainable.
It is. It's indeed a good opportunity.
I think probably yes, because we see VCs hold off on investing during the bear market. It doesn't make sense rationally if you think about it, but we're all human beings. Human psychology kicks in. We are emotional when the market is down. We're not comfortable investing. So unfortunately, that's just how it is. So there is a lot less investment during the bear market, and consequentially during the bull run, there's a lot of hype around new technologies. There's a lot of apparent promise in startups exploding and growing. So VCs are much more excited to invest in projects. And sometimes the investment decisions are not great during the bull run. But, again, we're all human beings, and that's just how it goes.
Right. I mean, if I was an investor too, I'll definitely want to invest more during the bull run than the bear market, because I want to hold on to my money, because I don't know when next the market is going to pick up again. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So for listeners who are currently listening now and are interested in starting a career in Web3, particularly in more established startups, what advice will you give them based on your own personal journey?
I think, like we kind of just touched on this before, I think of all the verticals in the tech industry, Web3 might have the lowest barrier to entry for new talent, because the sector itself is still in early stages of development and is constantly evolving. In terms of educating yourself about Web3 to kind of start building a career in this space or making a career shift, there are tons of free resources available on YouTube, for example. Like Whiteboard Crypto is a good channel to learn the fundamentals. There's Binance Academy, Morales Academy, CoinGecko's quarterly reports on the state of different sectors within Web3 are quite good. I definitely wouldn't pay for any educational courses. I think there's a ton of quality educational material available online for free. You can listen to podcasts about Web3, listen to the Web3 Quick Bites. But seriously, listen to podcasts and then just Google any unfamiliar terms. I think you're going to go down some major rabbit holes, but that's the fun part of learning something new, right? And then I would say it depends on your specialization. Most of the same traditional roles exist in Web3, like business development, sales, partnerships, operations, marketing. Marketing can be a bit different, but those strategies can still be learned by observing other projects. And you can always get a mentor in Web3 to advise you on some aspects of your role. And also, like we discussed before, Web3 communities are usually very supportive. So you can gain a lot of feedback and insights from. And if you're already an experienced professional in Web2 and you're joining a Web3 startup, you'll be bringing a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. I personally went the startup route, so the barrier to entry is much lower. You'll learn a lot in a very short time, and then you can move on to bigger projects just like you would in a typical Web2 career. I know Web3 can look intimidating to an outsider because it's got its own lingo, but most of the stuff can be picked up in a matter of weeks, I think. And it's still changing so fast that we're always learning new stuff. Like I can go on a 2-week vacation and feel out of the loop with the latest trend or terminology. So my point is, don't be intimidated because no one is an expert.
That's true. No one is an expert. And I also think that like 4 or 5 years ago, we now have loads of resources on the internet, free resources, in fact, that can help you in your journey in the work. Police space. Yes. Thanks for the tips and thanks for the advice. Lastly, looking at the broader picture of blockchain and Web3 adoption, what role do you see accelerators and investment firms like Cointelegraph playing in shaping the future of this technology? And how are you working to address some of the current limitations and challenges in the blockchain space?
That's a great question. I think actually the main role of accelerators and VCs is in supporting startups and helping them bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be. So this is often funding for their development, mentorship, resources that they're strapped on, infrastructure services, access to a network of other partners and investors, basically helping founders to build, launch, and grow their solutions and achieve their vision. And I think ultimately the startup founders are the change makers that are shaping the future of Web3. And the role of accelerators and VCs is just to empower them to execute on their vision.
Awesome. Some great work you guys are doing over at Cointelegraph. So I think I have one more question. So for anyone who is listening to this, who has plans to create a Web3 startup or to launch their Web3 startup, and they want to apply for Cointelegraph Accelerator, what do they have to do? What's the process like? And then any tips or advice you can share? Or it could not even be Cointelegraph Accelerator. It could be for other accelerator programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, you can go to the accelerator's website and they would have information on how to apply for their program. Usually it looks like a form that you fill out with the project name, your pitch deck, and a few key criteria that the accelerator is interested in to evaluate your project. But I think more importantly, first step is to think about whether you're ready to join an accelerator, because some founders are really strapped for resources and you do need to work jointly with the accelerator to make the most of the program and actually reap some value from it. And also what your end goal is, like what are you trying to achieve? There are different accelerators that have different focus. Some are helping projects with marketing. Some are investing funds into the project. Some are providing technical support and helping you to build and scale your solutions on their protocol, for example. So think about which direction you want to go in terms of growing your project and what kind of support you need. And you can select a suitable acceleration program for you. I think that's the number one thing, because a lot of startups, they're thinking about how can they pitch their project to accelerators, how can they present themselves in the right way to join an acceleration program. But the real question you have to ask yourself is, do you really need an accelerator? And if you do, what exactly is the type of acceleration program that's right for you, that will bring you the most value?
There you have it. If you are a future Web3 startup founder, Alexandra has shared tips. So I hope you were jotting that down. So to help you build a sustainable project in a Web3 space. But most importantly, if you're thinking of joining an accelerator, you should answer these questions that she just told you, that she just mentioned, that you need to ask yourself before thinking of joining any accelerator program, because that will help you align, that will help you keep your strategies aligned, and then you know what exactly you are going for. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for those tips. Thank you for the advice. It was so great to have you on the show today, and we hope we could do this again some other time soon, because let's say in the next year, because things would have evolved then, and I'm going to have like a zillion and one questions to ask.
Yeah. We'll have loads to talk about.
Right. And that wraps up today's episode of the Web3 Quick Bites podcast, guys. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, because I sure did. If you have any feedback or questions, please reach out on social media or send us an email at web3quickbites@gmail.com. Thanks again to our guest, Alexandra, for joining us. And most importantly, thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We'll be back next week with more exciting content, so be sure to subscribe and tune in. Bye.